What happens when the person sworn to protect your secrets discovers that the greatest threat isn't from outside enemies, but from the very system designed to keep you safe? Before we dive into one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in modern intelligence history, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and whether you believe there are lines that should never be crossed, even in the name of national security. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a story about one woman's decision. It's about the moment when loyalty to an oath collided with loyalty to a paycheck, when 3 decades of service met 3 minutes of truth, and when the most dangerous revelation wasn't what enemies were planning, but what friends were hiding. This is the story of Dr. Catherine Morris, and the day she walked into the most secure building in Washington, D.C., knowing she would never walk out the same person. But to understand why her testimony before Congress sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency in the Western world, why her words caused 3 senior officials to resign within 48 hours, and why her name is now spoken in whispers in the corridors of power, we need to go back to where it all began. Because Catherine Morris wasn't supposed to be a hero, she was supposed to disappear. For 30 years, Dr. Catherine Morris had been the invisible backbone of American intelligence. Not the kind of analyst you see in movies, with leather jackets and gun battles. No, Catherine was something far more valuable and far more rare. She was a true believer who never stopped asking questions. She had joined the agency in 1993, fresh out of MIT with a doctorate in computational linguistics and a naive faith that the good guys always wore white hats. Her specialization was signals intelligence, the art of finding meaning in the digital noise of a billion conversations. While others saw data, Catherine saw patterns. While others saw numbers, Catherine saw people. And while others saw threats, Catherine saw something else entirely. She saw power. And she saw how easily that power could corrupt. Her career had been exemplary. Commendations from 4 different directors. Successful operations that prevented attacks most Americans would never know about. A reputation for being brilliant, methodical, and most importantly, discreet. She lived alone in a modest apartment in Arlington, drove a 15-year-old Subaru, and spent her weekends volunteering at a local literacy center, teaching immigrants to read English. Her colleagues knew her as someone who brought homemade cookies to office meetings, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who had a photograph of her late mother on her desk but nothing else personal. She was, by all appearances, exactly what the agency wanted: loyal, competent, and invisible. But Catherine Morris had a quality that made her dangerous, though no one recognized it for decades. She had a conscience that wouldn't let her sleep at night, and she had a memory that never let her forget a single promise she'd made, especially the one she'd sworn when she first joined: to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The first crack in her faith appeared on an unremarkable Tuesday morning in March. Catherine had been assigned to review a new surveillance program, codenamed Prism Shadow, that had been fast-tracked through approval with minimal oversight. Her job was simple: assess the technical efficiency, the data integrity, the operational value. A routine audit that should have taken 2 weeks and produced a standard report. But Catherine Morris had never been good at ignoring details others missed. The program was breathtaking in its scope. It didn't just collect metadata from suspected foreign agents, as the legal framework suggested. It harvested everything. Every email sent by American citizens to family members abroad. Every video call between students and their parents in other countries. Every text message that happened to route through international servers. Every private photograph uploaded to cloud storage that crossed a border, even digitally. The system used artificial intelligence to scan for keywords, but the keyword list had grown so vast, so all-encompassing, that it essentially flagged nearly everyone who had any international contact whatsoever. Millions of Americans surveilled without warrant, without cause, without even the pretense of suspicion. And the data wasn't just collected, it was kept. Forever. Stored in vast server farms, indexed, cross-referenced, ready to be searched at any moment by analysts who needed no judicial approval. No supervisory sign-off, just their login credentials and curiosity. Catherine spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing the technical specifications. On the 4th day, she requested a meeting with her direct supervisor, Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran who had mentored her early in her career. Marcus listened to her concerns with the patient expression of someone who had heard it all before. "Catherine," he said gently, "this is bigger than you. Bigger than both of us." The authorization came from the very top. The legal team signed off. Congressional leadership was briefed. "Your job isn't to question policy. Your job is to assess functionality. So I need you to ask yourself, does the system work as designed? That's exactly my concern, Catherine replied, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her folder. It works perfectly. Too perfectly. Marcus, we're not monitoring threats. We're monitoring everyone. This isn't about security. This is about control. Marcus's expression hardened. Careful, Catherine. I've seen brilliant careers end because someone confused their technical expertise with moral authority. You're a scientist, not a philosopher. Complete your assessment, submit your report, and for God's sake, keep these thoughts to yourself. But Catherine couldn't keep them to herself. Because the more she dug into Prism Shadow, the more she realized it wasn't an anomaly. It was the system. There were 17 other programs, each with innocuous codenames, each collecting different categories of data, and together they formed a dragnet so comprehensive that the concept of privacy had become functionally obsolete. The Fourth Amendment, she realized with growing horror, had been quietly suspended, not by judicial decree or legislative action, but by technological capability and bureaucratic inertia. The agency had built the tools because it could, and then it had used them because they were there. She tried going through official channels first. She filed a formal concern with the Inspector General's office. She received a polite letter thanking her for her diligence and assuring her that all programs operated within established legal frameworks. She requested a meeting with the Deputy Director for Civil Liberties. She was told he was unavailable and perhaps she should focus on her assigned duties. She even considered requesting reassignment to a different division, but she knew it would make no difference. The surveillance wasn't happening in one corner of the agency. It was the agency. For 6 months, Catherine Morris lived in a state of moral paralysis. She would sit in meetings where officials discussed operational successes, programs that had neutralized threats, and prevented incidents. And she would feel sick, knowing that buried in those sanitized briefings were millions of constitutional violations. She would see colleagues receive promotions for expanding data collection capabilities. And she would remember her oath. She would drive past the Capitol building on her way home, past the monuments to freedom and justice, and she would feel like a fraud. The breaking point came in September, when she discovered something that transformed her quiet crisis into urgent action. While auditing access logs for Prism Shadow, she found that the system had been queried over 40,000 times in the past year by analysts searching not for foreign threats, but for domestic targets. Journalists who had written critical articles about intelligence agencies, political activists organizing protests, environmental groups opposing government energy policies, even congressional staffers working for members of the oversight committee that was supposed to be monitoring these exact programs. The surveillance state wasn't just watching everyone, it was targeting anyone who questioned it. Catherine made a decision that would destroy her life as she knew it. She spent 3 weeks carefully documenting everything. Not by copying classified files, which would be theft and treason, but by creating a detailed technical analysis, a roadmap that proved the programs existed, explained how they functioned, and demonstrated their constitutional violations, all using only information that could be legally disclosed or was already part of public record in obscured ways. She was a scientist, and she built her case like a mathematical proof, irrefutable, methodical, devastating. Then she called a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower protections, a woman named Jennifer Santos, who had represented intelligence officers before. Jennifer listened to Catherine's story for 3 hours, asked pointed questions, and finally said, "Dr. Morris, you understand that, even with legal protections, your life will never be the same. They will come after you with everything they have. Your reputation, your career, your peace of mind, all of it will be collateral damage. Are you prepared for that?" Catherine thought about her mother, a high school teacher who had taught her that silence in the face of injustice was complicity. She thought about the oath she had sworn. She thought about the millions of Americans who had no idea they were living in a surveillance state. And she said, "I didn't spend 30 years protecting this country just to watch it become the thing we were supposed to be protecting it from." The plan was strategic. Jennifer would arrange for Catherine to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee in a closed session, presenting her findings under whistleblower protection. The testimony would be classified, but it would force the committee to act. It would create a record. It would start the process of accountability. It was, by all legal standards, the right way to do it. But the moment Catherine filed the formal notification of her intent to testify, everything changed. Within hours, she was placed on administrative leave pending a security review. Her access to agency systems was revoked. Her office was sealed. 2 security officers arrived at her apartment at 6 in the morning with a warrant to seize her computers, her phones, her personal files. They were professional, polite, and utterly thorough. They treated her like a criminal while calling her ma'am. The next day, an agency spokesman told reporters that a senior analyst was under investigation for potential mishandling of classified information. They didn't name her, but they didn't have to. The intelligence community is small and rumors travel fast. By afternoon, her name was on Twitter. By evening, political pundits were questioning her loyalty. By midnight, she was receiving death threats. 3 people led the campaign to destroy her before she could speak. First, there was Director William Hargrove, a career bureaucrat who had risen through the ranks by never asking difficult questions and always protecting the institution above all else. Hargrove was a man who measured success by budget allocations and congressional approval, and Catherine's testimony threatened both. He authorized a full counterintelligence investigation into her background, her contacts, her financial records, searching for anything that could be used to discredit her. In internal memos that would later leak, he called her a disgruntled analyst with a messiah complex and suggested she might be mentally unstable. Second, there was Senator Richard Paulson, chair of the Intelligence Committee, a politician who had built his career on being tough on terror and who received substantial campaign contributions from defense contractors who profited from surveillance technology. Paulson had been briefed on PRISM Shadow and 16 other programs. He had never objected. He had never asked critical questions. And now Catherine's testimony threatened to expose that he had been complicit in the constitutional violations, either through willful ignorance or deliberate approval. Paulson began working behind the scenes to limit the scope of her testimony, to classify her findings, to ensure that the public would never hear what she had to say. In a phone call with Hargrove that was later obtained by investigators, Paulson said, "We need to make an example of her. If we let one analyst with a conscience blow up the whole program, every idealist in the intelligence community will think they can do the same thing." Third, and perhaps most painfully, there was Marcus Webb, her former mentor, who had been promoted to deputy director. Marcus visited her apartment one evening, unofficially off the record. He sat in her small kitchen drinking the coffee she made him out of habit, and he said, "Catherine, you've always been smarter than me. That's why. This doesn't make sense. You're throwing away everything for what? A principle? The Constitution is a 200-year-old document written by men who couldn't imagine the internet, terrorism, or artificial intelligence. We're protecting this country in ways they never could have anticipated. The threats are real, Catherine. The dangers are real. And you're going to undermine our ability to fight them because you have philosophical objections to how we do our job?" Catherine looked at this man, who had taught her the craft of intelligence analysis, who had believed in her when she was young and uncertain, and she said, "Marcus, when did we stop believing that the principles matter more than the outcomes? When did we decide that protecting Americans means we have the right to spy on every single one of them? When did the Constitution become optional?" Marcus stood to leave. At the door, he turned back and said, "I'm going to testify against you, Catherine. I'm going to tell the committee that you were always erratic, that you had difficulty accepting authority, that your judgment had been declining. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure nobody believes you. Not because I hate you, but because I love this country more than I love you. And I won't let you destroy the work of thousands of dedicated professionals who keep Americans safe while they sleep." The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in late October. Catherine barely slept the night before. She wore a simple navy suit, no jewelry except her mother's watch, and she carried a single folder with her statement. Jennifer met her outside the Capitol, and together they walked through the security checkpoints, through the marble corridors, into the room where the committee waited. The hearing room was closed to the public, but it was full nevertheless. Senators on the dais, agency attorneys at side tables, reporters with security clearances in the gallery, and in the front row, sitting with military posture and hostile eyes, Director Hargrove, Senator Paulson conferring with an aide, and Marcus Webb, her former friend, now her prosecutor. The chairman gavelled the session to order and made preliminary remarks about the seriousness of the matter and the need for both security and accountability. Then he turned to Catherine and said, "Dr. Morris, you have requested this opportunity to present testimony regarding intelligence collection programs. Before you begin, I want to remind you that you remain bound by your security clearances and your oath to protect classified information. Do you understand?" "I understand, Mr. Chairman," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady. "I have spent 30 years protecting classified information and the people who gather it. I understand my obligations, and I understand my oath to the Constitution. It's because of both that I'm here today." Senator Paulson leaned into his microphone, his voice dripping with disdain. Dr. Morris, isn't it true that you were placed on administrative leave for refusing to complete an assigned assessment? That you filed a complaint only after receiving an unsatisfactory performance review? That your concerns about these programs only emerged after you faced professional consequences for inadequate work? Catherine looked at him directly. Senator, every word of that statement is false, and I believe you know it. My performance reviews are part of the record. They're exemplary. I was placed on leave the day after I filed notice of my intent to testify. And my concerns about constitutional violations aren't retaliatory. They're the reason I'm here. Paulson's face reddened. You dare to lecture this committee about the Constitution? You, an unelected bureaucrat with delusions of grandeur. We have been briefed on these programs. They are legal. They are necessary. And they are none of your concern. Your job is to follow orders, not to substitute your judgment for that of the elected officials and Senate-confirmed directors who actually bear the responsibility for national security. The room went silent. The tension was suffocating. Catherine felt the weight of every eye on her, the hostility of powerful men who wanted her to crumble, to apologize, to disappear. This was the moment they expected her to break. Instead, she opened her folder. Senator Paulson, you say you've been briefed on these programs. Can you tell me, for the record, how many times in the past year analysts used PRISM Shadow to search the communications of American journalists? Paulson blinked. That information is classified, and this is not an appropriate forum. 43 times, Catherine said calmly. Can you tell me how many times the system was used to monitor environmental activists who were organizing protests against offshore drilling? Dr. Morris, you are dangerously close to disclosing 167 times. Can you tell me how many times it was used to monitor the communications of congressional staffers working for members of this very committee? The room erupted. Senators began talking over each other. Paulson was shouting about breaches of security. Hargrove was conferring urgently with agency lawyers. And Catherine sat quietly, her hands folded on the table, waiting for them to exhaust themselves. Finally, the chairman gavelled for order. Dr. Morris, he said, his voice strained. These are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? Mr. Chairman, I have compiled a technical analysis that demonstrates the capabilities and documented uses of 17 separate surveillance programs. I have done so without disclosing specific classified methods or sources. What I am telling you is something you should already know, something you were supposed to be overseeing, and something that violates the constitutional rights of every American. These programs don't just collect data on foreign threats. They collect everything from everyone all the time. And that data is being used not to protect Americans, but to monitor them, to intimidate them, to control them. Director Hargrove stood up, his voice booming. This is exactly the kind of reckless, irresponsible grandstanding that endangers our operations and aids our enemies. Dr. Morris was a mediocre analyst with a history of insubordination. She was passed over for promotion multiple times. She clearly has a personal vendetta against the agency. And she is using this committee as a platform for her grievances. I move that her testimony be stricken from the record, and that she be held in contempt for attempting to disclose classified information. Marcus Webb stood next. His voice was softer, more sorrowful, more devastating. Mr. Chairman, I supervised Dr. Morris for 15 years. I considered her a friend. But I have to tell you that her judgment has deteriorated significantly over the past year. She became obsessed with these programs, refusing to accept legitimate legal explanations, questioning the motives of her colleagues, seeing conspiracies where there were only policy disagreements. She submitted the same concerns multiple times through proper channels, and each time they were reviewed and found to be without merit. This testimony isn't about protecting the Constitution. It's about a troubled analyst who couldn't accept that she was wrong. Catherine felt the words like physical blows. To be attacked by Hargrove was expected. To be destroyed by Marcus, the man who had been her mentor, her advocate, her friend, was almost unbearable. She saw in his eyes that he believed what he was saying, that he had convinced himself that she was the problem, that the institution was worth protecting at any cost. The chairman looked at Catherine. Dr. Morris, these are significant challenges to your credibility. Would you like to respond? Catherine took a slow breath. This was the moment everything would change. She had known it was coming, but the weight of it still pressed down on her like gravity. Mr. Chairman, I would. But first, I'd like to clarify something. Director Hargrove says I was passed over for promotion. That's true. I was offered the position of Deputy Director for Technical Operations 3 years ago. I declined it because accepting would have required me to brief congressional leadership on programs I believed were unconstitutional, and I wasn't willing to lie to Congress. That decision is in my personnel file. Director Hargrove knows. This because he's the one who offered me the position. Hargrove's face went ashen. That's a gross mischaracterization. It's documented, Director. And Mr. Webb says I couldn't accept that I was wrong. He's right, I can't accept it. Because I'm not wrong, and I can prove it. She reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a letter, dated 6 years ago, written by Deputy Director Marcus Webb to the Inspector General's office. In it, Marcus expressed his own concerns about the legal framework of bulk data collection. He questioned whether the programs complied with constitutional protections. He requested a comprehensive legal review. That request was denied, and Marcus was told that his career advancement depended on his willingness to be a team player. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. I found this letter 3 months ago. Catherine continued, her voice gentle but unyielding. It was in an archived file that was scheduled for destruction. Marcus, you were right 6 years ago. You saw what I see now. You knew it was wrong. And they convinced you to forget it, to rationalize it, to become complicit in it. I'm not angry at you. I'm heartbroken for you. Because you were the person who taught me that integrity wasn't negotiable. And then you negotiated yours away. Marcus sank back into his chair. And for a moment Catherine saw the man she had once known. The mentor who had believed in principles before he believed in power. She saw the exact moment his certainty cracked. But she wasn't done. She turned to Senator Paulson. Senator, you asked if I dare to lecture you about the Constitution. I don't. But I would like to read you something if I may. She pulled out another document, and her voice took on a different quality. Softer, but stronger. This is a letter I received 2 weeks ago. It's from a Marine Corps veteran named David Chen, who served 3 tours in Afghanistan. David was surveilled under Prism Shadow because he exchanged emails with his brother, who lives in Beijing. The system flagged him as a potential security risk. As a result, he was investigated, his bank accounts were audited, and he was denied a security clearance for a job he needed to support his family. David wrote to me because he heard I was testifying. He said, I fought for the Constitution overseas. I didn't expect to come home and find it had been abandoned while I was gone. Thank you for fighting for it now. Her voice broke slightly, just enough to be human. I have 700 letters like David's, from teachers and engineers and nurses and students, from Republicans and Democrats, from people who love this country and trusted their government to respect their rights. They don't know about Prism Shadow or the other programs. They don't know their emails and phone calls and private moments are being collected and stored forever. But they know something is wrong. They feel watched. They feel like they've lost something fundamental. And they have. Senator Paulson tried to interrupt, but Catherine raised a hand. I'm almost finished, Senator. You say these programs are legal, but legal is not the same as constitutional, and constitutional is not the same as right. I joined the intelligence community because I believed we were the good guys. I still believe that about most of the men and women who serve, but the system we've built has become the enemy we were supposed to be fighting against. We've created a surveillance state that would make the Stasi envious, and we've told ourselves it's necessary, that it's justified, that it's temporary. But it's not temporary, it's permanent, and it's growing. And if we don't stop it now, if we don't stand up and say this has gone too far, then we will wake up one day and realize we've protected America by destroying everything that made it worth protecting. The room was so quiet that Catherine could hear the IE ventilation system, the shuffling of papers, the rapid breathing of Senator Paulson. She looked at each member of the committee, making eye contact, letting them see her conviction. I spent 30 years being silent, she said. I did my job. I followed orders. I kept secrets. And I watched as the agency I loved, the mission I believed in, became corrupted by unchecked power and technological capability. So yes, Senator Paulson, I dare to speak. I dare to stand here and tell you that we have betrayed our oath, that we have violated the trust of the American people, and that history will judge us for what we do next. I am prepared to face whatever consequences come from telling this truth. The question is, are you prepared to face the consequences of continuing to hide it? She closed her folder and sat back, her hands steady now, her face calm. She had said everything she came to say. Whatever happened next was beyond her control. For a long moment no one moved. Then something extraordinary happened. A young senator from the minority party, a freshman who had been silent throughout the hearing, leaned forward to his microphone.